Welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast, where we sit down and have real conversations with business leaders that have been where you are. During these interviews, we'll dive into what it takes to improve systems and champion processes that maximize performance. Each week, our trailblazing guests share their experiences and understanding of the workforce to help inspire change, challenge our thinking, and share what it takes to successfully travel the road to profitability. Now here's our host, co-founder and chief evangelist of About Time and WorkMax, Mike Merrill.
Hello and welcome back to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Merrill, and today we invited Mr. Milton Stark back on to have a deeper dive and conversation around software tools and how they relate to project management. Milton is an expert with more than a decade of experience in developing project management solutions and also in consulting and advising companies how to gain better control of their projects. So I think you'll really enjoy this second episode with Milton, and hopefully you have an opportunity to have a few takeaways that help you on your projects. Well, welcome back, Milton. Thanks for coming back and joining us for another episode.
Well, hi, I'm glad to be here. And doesn't look like the week hurt you any. You're doing pretty good.
Yeah, I'm doing fine, I think. I'm a week wiser and a week older, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I can claim any wiser, but I think I get older about a 3-to-1 ratio. 1 week I get about 3 weeks older. So,
yeah, I'm not quite there yet, but anyway, I'm sure that's coming up my rearview mirror here soon. So, well, we had a great conversation last week talking about scope change and the challenges that many companies have, and maybe some of the reasons that they are running into those issues. We wanted to focus this week a little bit more on the software side and maybe some of the tools that companies use as opposed to just better policies. I guess to start off, what types of software systems do you recommend that PMs have in their tech stack to be more successful?
I think for the project manager, there are two primary ones that kind of link together with some other stuff. But the scheduling tool that the project manager uses needs to fit the project, and the project manager needs to understand how it works. And there's such a huge variety, not just in tools that are available, but in the projects themselves and the scope themselves and stuff. So if you're doing a relatively small internal project, you may be able to use something so simple as a Excel spreadsheet to develop a schedule on, and that may be all that you need, because you just need how much overall time have I scheduled for this, and how much overall time have I scheduled for that. So there's that on the one end, and that goes all the way out to some of the ERP systems like the SAP. One that I've worked with a lot and I like working with is Primavera, the P6 system and process and stuff. And one of the reasons that I like Primavera, and I'll put some caveats on the backside of that. One of the reasons that I like Primavera is it does a very good job of tying the labor costs to activities. The way that it's put together, it's you build the schedule based on chargeable activities, and the activities are directly related to the labor accounts back into the financial system. So that's one of the reasons I like it, is it does what I think is the 100% goal of a software system. It saves time and physical effort for the project manager and the people working on the project. So project manager, the project schedule is or should be the primary management tool that the project manager uses. That should be the first thing he looks at every morning and the last thing he looks at before he leaves in the evening. It is, like I said, it is the primo tool. The other tool that's necessary that ties into that is his financial stuff. Now, in project management, we rarely talk about project finances. Yet, what are the two things that we determine success of a project on? Budget. Budget. That's money. Okay, the project manager is responsible for managing the budget, not just the schedule. Our successful project is on time, under budget, under budget. Okay, you can't manage the money and the costs on a project if you don't know what they are. Okay, so whatever system you use for the project manager, he needs a real-time accounting of the labor hours, the cost of labor, his cost of materials, and all of that stuff has to relate back to what he's actually doing, the time frame, and that ties back to the schedule. And here's the piece that ties back to the schedule that is probably the biggest tripping point over the biggest piece that project managers trip over when it comes to the schedule. When we're working a schedule as a project manager, we're concentrating on getting the work done as we move through this project. And that's where your brain is. Everything that you're doing is directed toward getting the work done as we get through this project. I could move this to here, and I could do these two things in tandem with each other, and I can do this. And that's what you're doing to manage the project. But the bottom line for your boss isn't whether or not the work's getting done. The bottom line for your boss is whether the little triangles on the schedule are being met. And those little triangles on the schedule, those are money milestones. Okay? Those are the times when a billable is due. And that's what the client's looking at as well. If you're doing a design build situation, there's specific criteria that's supposed to be met on a specific day when you're going to complete the design, bill the client, and the client's going to pay you what they owe you on that. Now, that comes into a major thing for projects, particularly if your company is a public company. Because one of the things that you do as a public company is projections, where you're going to be on a certain time. And those projections involve when you receive income. Well, when you receive income in the plan is those little triangles on the schedule. And if that little triangle moves, it may not be a scope change, but your boss is hammering the walls because his financial projections are falling behind and his corporate stock is dropping. Now, probably not off of one project, but if that's a cumulative thing around the company, that's a big issue. So in order for the project manager to manage that, there's two things that have to exist. One, he has to understand what those milestones are, what they mean, and how important they are to the company, which most of them do understand. But the other thing is they have to have a real-time financial and labor reporting system in place so they know where they stand in relation to those milestones.
Well, and you said a few key things right there. Knowing where they stand in real time, I mean, that requires these software tools. You talked about Primavera P6, you talked about SAP, whatever those systems are that are managing your schedule, your budget, the estimation of costs, and also just, if you got a project management solution, it's important that those systems are talking and communicating with one another so that all of the stakeholders in the project are looking at the same data and able to make those same adjustments or call a timeout when needed to make a correction so that the budget doesn't keep running off the rails and impact everybody else, right?
Exactly. That is, yes. So if you're a pretty big outfit and you've got some good overhead money to work with, there's half a dozen ERP systems, like you were just saying, SAP and some of these others that have all of that information available within them. But the honest truth is those systems are pretty expensive, and they're relatively time-consuming within your organization. You have to have an IT department if you have those software systems. Okay,
Which means
a small, yes, big bucks, big bucks.
Yeah, burn of money.
So if you're a little bit on the smaller side, you're more likely to have independent pieces. Like you'll have a finance and accounting program system, and you'll have a scheduling system, and you'll have an estimating system, and you'll have a marketing system. Marketing plays into this whole thing on the front end. They're way more important than a lot of people want to attach to the marketing organization in projects. But anyway, so each of those things that you listed need to happen, and they happen faster, better, gooder if we have software to do them with. I am certainly an advocate of using software. It is a tool, or many tools that we have developed that are hugely time-saving. If we can take some of those mundane activities off of the project managers and the people that are working in the field out there, and they can spend the time doing evaluations and things they need to do to support that, we're all much better off. But what's happened in a lot of cases, and again, I think I made allusion last week to a project management office. This is really where the PMO comes into play, because you need someone from the organizational aspect to look at a project in the overall spectrum. And let me just kind of do a data dump here on what happens with the project. We could argue about some of the sequential steps, but essentially the things that happen on a project is you get an opportunity to bid, and then you make a decision whether or not you want to go after that work. So you turn it over to a developer. Well, somebody has to develop an initial scope of the project. That's typically done by your marketing organization. They'll come in and say, okay, we have this opportunity, and this is the scope they want done. So our initial scope development usually comes from the marketing group. So now the development group is going to take that marketing scope. This is the big picture of what we want to do. They're going to look at that and say, okay, what do we have to do to make that come to fruition? We have to buy this, we have to buy that, we have to transport those. So immediately now when I say I have to buy this, that ratchets into the system a whole bunch of things. One, I can't buy anything without a specification. I can't get a specification without an engineering department. So the first thing that needs to happen is, do we have specifications for the equipment that we want to buy? If we don't, somebody's going to have to develop that specification. That specification is going to have to be turned into some kind of purchasing order. That purchasing order is going to have to be turned into a proposal, or maybe a request for proposal, and then proposals are going to have to be evaluated, and then we're going to have to select a vendor, and then we're going to have to write a contract with the vendor, and then somebody's going to have to manage that contract with the vendor and make sure that the material's going to be at the place on time, so on and so forth. So that's one whole string of multiple people involved in getting this thing put together to just get that one piece of material. That's going to be true for every piece of material that you have. You have the same process. You got to start with the spec, get the rec, to go through all of that process, okay? If your procurement system isn't part of the ERP system or part of your management, your marketing management, then you need to have a mechanism, a formal process mechanism that takes the information from this group of software that developed an output. You have to have some way of getting that information into the next system. We generally lack that in organizations. Most organizations tend to do those and that progresses all the way through. You collect all of that information for finance, and you develop how much our material costs are going to be. Labor, every one of those things that gets installed has labor costs. Labor costs are different. You're going to have costs for doing, maybe we're doing design work. So you've got a design engineering organization, and that results in a whole bunch of processes. They have to do the design, and that design has to be submitted to the client for approval and changes. So you have to have a document management system that manages all of those documents, sends them in and out and back and forth. So we got to have a document management system that goes in there. How do you get documents in and out of the document management system? Who controls those documents? Okay. If your document management system is a standalone, then you have to have an input process to make sure that when a specification has been generated by engineering, it goes into the procurement system via a document management system. You can't just write the spec and take it and hand it to the buyer and say, go buy this for me. It needs to go into a document control process. Okay. Now, if I'm a single company and I'm building a single house, I might not need formal stuff. But if I'm a single company and I'm building 5 houses at once, I need formal processes to get that information from point A to point B. And that exists for all of the pieces of your project. Even after we even after we've completed the project, we get a contract, we turn it over to the project manager. Now the project manager has to have a system that takes care of his project schedule. He has to have the document management doesn't end when you start the project. It becomes much more massive. Now you have the issue not only of controlling the documents in-house and getting them back and forth, but one of your deliverables on your contract is probably going to be documents of one kind or another. You have to have a formal process for getting those documents to your client and getting a receipt from them so you can come back later and close the project. That's all process that needs to be established. If you're doing multiple projects within an organization, that process needs to be the same for every project. You cannot have a project manager developing his own system for his own project, which is what a lot of companies are still doing. All of that says you need a project management office who is responsible for developing and overseeing the process by which we manage projects. Software, it's like there's levels. You have the software frame up here that does all of those things. You have software that does document control. You have software that does financials. And within the financials, you have both labor and materials. You have transportation. Transportation has to go out and find and make arrangements for the stuff you're going to ship, but they also have to handle the shipping documents to show that it was done. They also have to handle the financial information going back into the finance system so that company can get paid. So you have all of these. We like to think of a project as start at point A, you finish at point B, and it's one solid straight line going all the way there. But it's not. It is a massive series of loops and feedbacks and interconnections to make all of that stuff go smoothly. And if you're going to lay out a schedule, you need to know how all of those interfaces work. If you're going to follow a schedule, you need to have something that makes all of those interfaces work. If you have something like SAP or one of those big ERP systems, then your transportation, your marketing, your finance, your scheduling, they're all within that same system. So when I am in the transportation department and I submit I purchase transport from one place to another, that information automatically within the ERP system gets sent to finance under the accounting number for that project, and it shows up in real time to the project manager as an expense against the project. So those ERP systems, properly put together, are huge, wonderful, wonderful things. But they only work if we're putting the right input in at the right time as we're going through, which still means every software system that you have has to have a physical process that is associated with it. And we're buying and installing software so fast, we're making billionaires developing software, but we're not developing the support systems that allow that software to do the work.
Well, and in the middle, you've got the project manager who is the referee in the middle. If they don't get a change order tied to those changes, even if the software dominoes get all knocked over, but in the middle, we forget to call a timeout and make sure we get paid for all this. And I hear companies talk about this all the time. They don't bill for work that was done. And by the time that they go back and try and reconfigure what happened, it's too late to get paid. The project's closed out. They're not going to they don't get paid for it. They did all the work. They absorbed all of those extra costs of that disruption to their schedule and their process, and they don't get any money to cover it.
Right. And that's kind of the undertone that kills everything. And it comes back to that physical input to the system. The wonderful thing about an electronic system is it will do exactly what you tell it to do. The problem with a damn electronic system is it will do exactly what you tell it to do.
Yep. And nothing that you don't. Right?
Yeah, it won't do something different. It won't decide, oh no, you made a mistake, or, oh, you need to have this information. If you don't tell it you need that information, it won't give it to you. So we have to have, I think we make a big mistake in the industry as a whole today, in that when we say we're developing a project management process, what they're actually doing is somebody's going out and buying the software they need to do all of these pieces. But that software in and of itself is not a process. That software implements a process. And if you haven't designed that implementation, if you haven't designed that process and matched that up into your software, then you have a whole bunch of systems that are doing exactly what I told them to do, which in many cases was nothing, because I didn't give them the information.
And you're illustrating another point that I think is critical and that we should highlight. There needs to be mobile technology, boots on the ground solutions that are communicating with these systems and feeding data and making sure that data gets passed from one place to another, so that there's that middleware, that middle process that ensures that all these other things happen appropriately, and that visibility of what's actually happening on the project is delivered and shared with the rest of the stakeholders. Because many, many times also, I mean, I could think of, maybe hundreds of meetings over the last 20 years that I've been in, when I'm around a table in a boardroom and there's 10 or 12 executives to a company, and we're proposing our software solution to help them. And, someone in payroll or someone in finance will ask or answer a question. And, maybe it's a loaded question that I say, hey, well, how are you collecting this labor data and this productivity data out on the project? And, maybe the person in finance will say, well, the PMs turn it in once a week on Friday so that we can process payroll. And then without fail, inevitably, an executive, maybe even the CEO, will say, we're only collecting that once a week? I thought we were getting that every day. And then they'll say, well, we're supposed to, but nobody really does it. So we make sure that on Friday we have it all turned in. And then the CEO will say, when do we stop doing that? And then someone else will say, we haven't been doing that forever. And then he'll say, you got to be kidding me. And so all of a sudden, we become a therapist, if you will, in the middle of this communication that wasn't happening and these assumptions. And so, again, having tools in place that are actually being implemented and utilized, and then sharing that information will make sure that there are not gaps between the boardroom and the field, where the actual money is being spent, right?
Yep. And that's a beautiful example. Time on a project is, if you've got a project of any size at all, keeping time on the project can be the biggest problem that a project manager has if he has to pencil anything to do with that. Okay. The ideal situation is that the information is provided. Well, maybe not ideal. My ideal situation is that when a crew goes out to work, they have a work document that says, this is what you're supposed to do today. This is what you're supposed to accomplish today. And there's a box in there that says, this is what your time code for this work is. And then somewhere along the line, when they come back in after work, when the guy's checking out, he should pass by a computer, or maybe it's his frickin' telephone with the technology we've got today. He pulls up an app on his phone and says, okay, what did I do today? I did 4 hours on project 3247 and 2 hours on this project, and then I had 2 hours of fuck off time. And here's a problem. I'm sorry about the language there. Two hours of time that I really wasn't doing anything. How do I account for that? That's another conversation about project management, but that's a big issue. The time that we have labor on site that we don't have productive work for that labor to do. That's a problem in project management. But anyway, that information should then go directly into that financial system, be processed electronically, and when the project manager gets ready to close out the day at 9 o'clock at night, which is typically where the full project manager's at, he already has the labor stats for today. Because once it went into the system, our electronic buddy ran all the numbers, and now he has a real time for the shift that finished 6 hours ago. Before the next shift is finished, he has real-time data on the last shift call. That's what a project manager really needs to be able to run his project. And the same is true for transportation, for materials. He needs to have that real-time information on when things are taking place. And those systems have to be connected. If they're not connected electronically, then they have to be connected with a physical activity. Those physical activities, if they are the connection, they have to be proceduralized, maintained, and enforced. You can't say, as I've seen, as I did myself 30 years ago, I was a field man. I was out there carrying tools. And there was more than once, I didn't fill my timesheet out till the end of the week, right? Because I was supposed to get off at 6 o'clock. At 6:45, I was coming in the shop and dumping my tools. I ain't getting paid for that 45 minutes, right? So I'm wanting out of there. I'll do my timesheet tomorrow. Well, Friday, before I leave, the foreman's standing over me with a big stick going, give me your timesheet, give me your timesheet. That's not how we need to work.
Right. Yeah, in today's technology environment, there's no excuse. And I would even submit, daily at a minimum, but really we have tools today, our company provides tools today that can give you real-time arrival, departure, cost coding, can prompt for productivity before you leave. You can't clock out until you put your quantities in. Facial recognition, GPS, geofence. We could validate how many boots are on the ground, whose boots are they, what time did they get there, what did they do, and how much did they complete before they leave the site. And if you do that,
see, you have all of that information,
yeah,
but none of that information is there if you don't have the guy twisting the stuff in.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so no matter how complete a complete ERP system still requires physical input, even if that input is to push a button that says yes or no in answer to a question.
Sure.
Requires physical input.
See, the beauty of daily or even better real-time entry is when it didn't happen, you don't have it. When you don't have it, you know it didn't happen. So if you've got a process in place where daily review and approval and sign-off of management, as soon as somebody doesn't, I already know, if I've got an exception report, 192 men and women clocked in and clocked out, but 23 of them didn't. And here's the list. Now I can manage that process and put something in place.
Exactly. And that's the key. That's the key, what you just said. Now I can manage the system, manage the situation. That's the key. A project manager, and actually a manager, period, whether it's the project going all the way up to the CEO, you cannot manage a process that you're not intimately involved with and knowledgeable of in real time. Most, when you get up to that level, the CEO and the board of directors and stuff, they don't manage things anyway.
Oversee.
That's not their job. They oversee people who are doing the management. The people that are doing the management need to have that real-time connection, that real-time contact. And it's the job of that CEO and the COO and the board of directors to make sure that those people, A, have the appropriate tools to manage with, well, that they have the appropriate things to manage, they have the appropriate tools to manage them with, and they have the time and the wherewithal to do that. That's the job of those top line people.
That's the tools the company invests in to put in your hands so you've got the right tool for the job, right? I mean, you give somebody a pick and a shovel instead of a backhoe, they can still complete the work, but it's going to take a whole lot longer, and it's not going to be nearly as pretty, right?
And there's an interesting correlation with what you just said about I can use guys with picks and shovels, or I can use a backhoe. The decision on which one of those I use isn't necessarily a given. Right. Just because I have a backhoe available, okay? But in order to make that work on the project, the backhoe to do that job might be 3 hours, where 3 guys out there doing the same thing with picks and shovels might be 3 days, but the risk associated with the backhoe may be well overset that the 3 days of time and stuff is worth it for those 3 guys to go out and do it. If I were to take a backhoe and cut a hydrogen line that I knew was there, but I don't know where, I want a guy, hell, I'm not even going to give those 3 guys picks. I'm just going to give them a shovel.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, good point. So I guess, the takeaway for sure is, you've got to have the right tools, but also you've got to have a process that ensures that they're being utilized. Because we call it shelfware or, dustware, where a company invests in software solutions, but it sits on the shelf because people aren't using it. Right?
Yeah. One of the things I find a lot of companies are very hesitant to do, and I think is a serious mistake for most of them who make that choice, they don't want to write the process down and make it a set of rules. They say they want to leave the flexibility for the managers and stuff to make choices. The problem is most of that stuff doesn't have any choice involved except get the information put in. So when you get a new guy on the job, for him to have a written document that says this information goes from this place to this place to this place, you enter it into this system, and this is where you go to find instructions on how to use that system. That's an important part of your organization and your operation. Unless your operation is 4 people, you need to write down what your process is and to actually define and give the people that you're going to hold people responsible. You need to give those people the tools to manage that responsibility. And in many cases, that tool is nothing more than information, telling them where to go, what to do, so on and so forth. we don't want to do that. I had a big project years ago that involved welding, and company lost a large amount of money on a welding project that should have been very straightforward. It was machine welding, should have been very straightforward. And so we came in and we did a little bit of analysis, and I came back from the analysis and I said, we need to train the welders on this process. And the manager of the welding department was in the meeting, and he told me I was full of, that smelly stuff, that he had the best welders in the world doing that work. And I, meaning me, not even a welder, how are you going to teach these guys anything? And I said, well, it's actually quite simple, because I am an instrument man and your guys are welders, and they're doing machine welding. They're running an instrument which is doing the welding. They don't have their hands on that. They don't know how to run that machine. I'm not going to teach them how to run a bead. They know how to run a bead. I'm going to teach them how to use the machine. We made good money on every project after that. I ended up training almost 300 welders before that project was all finished. Now, the first class I had with welders was very interesting, because the first question in the first class with 20 certified welders was, where did you get your certification? To me, that was their question to me. Where did you get your certification? What makes you somebody I should listen to? And I answered it. I had one of the machines in there, and I just picked one of the guys and to put him over in front of the machine and said, turn it on. And he went, where's the switch? And I said, that's my certification.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. So again, investing in the right tools, investing in the right training, and then having the right process to actually ensure that it's being leveraged and utilizes that. I mean, it sounds like you got to have all three, right?
You got to have them all. Yeah, if you're missing any one, it's kind of like, what is the fire triangle, right? They say if you remove any one of the three from the fire triangle, you put the fire out. Well, if you don't put all three in there, you can't make a fire. Same thing. If we don't put all the pieces in, we can't actually run a project and do it efficiently.
So I guess to wrap up today, I mean, we talked last episode about some of the challenges, and cost overruns, scope change, scope creep, all those types of things. We talked this time about software solutions, how to actually leverage those, what areas to focus on. What is the takeaway for today for the listeners from your perspective?
That we're looking at 2 points of a multi-pointed star. They are interconnected. What we talked about last week with project scope control is unequivocally connected to the process by which we manage, which is connected to the process, not just the process, but the actual information that we utilize when we put the project together, what we use to develop the bid, what we use to develop the schedule, how we develop the project in the first place. The software side of this, if I like to say there's one project, one schedule. In my mind, a project starts when you identify an opportunity. The project ends when you close the last piece of paper at closeout. Okay? And closing the last piece of paper means that you've accounted for every nickel that was ever spent on that project. That's really what the closeout amounts to. Okay? In between, from that point to that point, is a single project. And we don't treat it as a single project. We treat it as a development, as a negotiation, as an implementation, as a closeout. Those things are just sections of the overall, and they impact each other from the beginning. one of the things that I teach when I'm teaching project management, one of the things that I teach is closeout starts with the first procurement document that's issued. Because one of the first things we do that's eventually going to have to be closed out is a receipt for the material that we ordered. So the first thing that happens in project closeout is to identify what we bought. That's the first procurement document that we sent. So closeout starts on like day 3 of the project that's a 5-year project. Okay? It's all interlinked. It's all connected. And successful project management to me means that we, as an organization, we understand that process from opportunity to close out, and we have all of the links that are necessary to make the pieces work. Most companies, most organizations have all of the pieces to make it work. What they lack is the link between the path. How do I get from this point to this point? The more you can do electronically within a single system, like an ERP, the more of that is done kind of for you. Okay, the kind of thing in an ERP system, we identify that we need to have a widget, and that widget has to be designed. Okay, so that design is going to go to an engineer, and the engineer is going to develop that design, and out of that design, he's going to do a couple of things. One, he's going to develop documents that at that point have to go into a document control system, and that document control system is going to allow them to monitor, revise, review, edit, and issue that document. That all happens within that document control system. Once he's done the design and pushed the button to put it into the document control system, the links are all made, because if you've got that system running properly, the document gets submitted, then it immediately goes to, when it gets submitted in the process, it notifies the next person down the line that you need to write a transmittal to send this to that person. And when it comes back, it's recognized and it needs to go back to the engineer. Those links take place in the software. But when it comes back to the engineer has to know, I got to get that. Now, what do I need to go with it? And what modification am I going to make to put it back in the system? So he extracts it from the system. That's a physical activity. If our stuff is closely enough tied together, I recently worked with a company that was going to a 3D design system, which was connected with their document control directly into their finance system. So once the document was put in, you could track it within that electronic system all the way through. That's wonderful. But it still has to, that tracking causes things to happen. The links to what has to happen need to be connected. So all of that interconnection is there. If the document control, the finance, the design system, if they're all separate, then those need to be procedural links that are there. And that's where we fail a lot of times. We think the designer is going to take care of all that, and the designer is responsible for writing the design. Included in the design is not just the drawings themselves. Actually, probably one of those drawings is going to be a specification. And that specification doesn't necessarily, that specification may not go to the client for approval, but that specification needs to go to the buyer, right? To go get that piece of equipment or have that piece of equipment made, okay? So that link to the buyer, if that doesn't take place, if the submission of the specification into the system does not electronically send it to the buyer and notify the buyer, then we have to have a physical system that does that. Might be an email, okay? But it's something that that person has to do. So those are the links I'm talking about. Every function that takes place in these hundreds of functions that take place, they're all linked together. And our project management is making sure that all of those links are working from the time we've identified the opportunity until we close the project.
I love that you summed it up and say, when you bill out the last nickel on the project and close it out, that's when you now have all of the data and can say, good project, bad project. Do we want to do it again, or do we want to run from those? And if we want to do it again, then the process starts over, and now we iterate, we learn from what we just went through. Maybe we need to charge a little more. Maybe it was, super creamy and you can get a little more competitive on the next one. But you have all of the data you need to make another decision to either do another project like that or not.
A sideline, maybe a whole different conversation is, I'll just drop 2 words on you and say I'm done. Consider for another subject, lessons learned.
That's what it's all about, right? That's how we grow.
We do a pretty bad job of it.
Yeah, we do. Yep. We're old dogs and we don't like new tricks. As an industry, right?
As the industry, yes. Some of us are just old dogs.
Well, Milton, it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed the conversations we've had these last couple of weeks. Really enjoyed learning from you, and I'm positive that our listeners will have some great takeaways to manage their projects better here moving forward. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you.
And thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation myself.
Thank you for joining us today on the Mobile Workforce Podcast, sponsored by About Time Technologies and WorkMax. If you liked the conversation we had today, or were able to learn anything new or helpful, please make sure to follow us on our WorkMax page on LinkedIn and on Instagram at WorkMax_. And subscribe to the show on iTunes or your preferred podcast platform so you will never miss another insightful episode. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review and share the show with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us and will allow us to continue providing impactful information with others looking to improve their results in their business and, in turn, their life.